Thank you. Guys, if y'all pray with me. Father, thank you so much for your word, for your son. Thank you for loving us when we're unlovable. Thank you for being there when we feel alone. God, let tonight open up our hearts to what you would have to say. Let me speak the words that you would speak. And God, just allow all of us to receive what you would have for us tonight. We love you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Rev students, how are we tonight? All right, not very good apparently. That's all right, man. We're hopefully tonight is going to be a lot of fun. You guys are having a good time. My name is Chris. If you don't know who I am, I've never met you. I'm part of the preaching team here at Rev Students. And I'm excited to be here, thrilled as always. If tonight is your first night, I want to say welcome. Hope tonight has been fun. Hope you find tonight beneficial in some way. And if it is your first night here, you're opening up the book in the middle, okay? This is the third week of our series that we've called Relationship Goals, right? Okay? So, and the whole series is talking about relationships and dating and sex and marriage and all that kind of stuff that goes together with relationships and how that works. And we're just trying to see what God would have to say to us about how relationships work. And so, again, I'm week 3, but week 1, Jeremy kicked us off by helping us understand, helping us walk through this idea that relationships and dating and sex and all intimacy, vulnerability, this is God's design, that God made all of this for us to enjoy, for us to connect to each other with, and in some ways connect to Him with, that we would know He is a relational being by how we operate in relationships with other people. And so what Jeremy helped us understand was that, particularly when it comes to sex, that it is a good thing, but a lot of times we misprioritize it. We put it as the number one thing in our life, and it just can't bear that weight. And so it is good, but it's not God. And then the second week, Jeremy talked to us about marriage, if you'll remember, and how that works and what God has to say about that, and particularly how it intersects with the LGBTQ plus community, and which, for you guys at your age, as you're trying to figure out who you are and how you're supposed to operate and, what is going on with you inside of you. Some of you either may be dealing with something like that, or maybe you know people that are dealing with something like that. And so it can be a real heavy topic to talk about and to try and sift through. And I thought Jeremy did a great job showing grace, compassion, love to all of us, and at the same time speaking truth to us, helping us understand that the biggest mistake that we can make is to think that our way is better than God's way. And so tonight, I'm just going to dive, not deep, I'm just going to kind of skim over and talk a little bit about how technology and media affect us, influence us when it comes to relationships and particularly sex. And so hope that that's going to be cool with you guys. If you've got a Bible, go ahead and turn to Romans 12. That's where we're going to start tonight. And just before we get started, just a heads up on Romans. This is Paul, who is a first century Jew, writing a letter to Roman Christians. So he's writing to people who are not Jewish, who are as far away from Jewish as you could be. And the Roman culture was highly sexualized, very promiscuous, and they not only participated in, but celebrated things like homosexual practice and even prostitution in their religious services, if you can imagine that. If you can imagine coming to Rev Students and part of the service is prostitution. And this was not weird to them. They didn't think anything was wrong with this. This was just who they were. This was just their culture. Didn't even stand out to them that this would be in some ways wrong or against any kind of moral code that they should adhere to. And so that's the culture that Paul is writing to the Romans in. And he's saying, hey, listen, Romans, non-Jewish Christians, you guys, the way he words it is you have been grafted in to the olive tree that is Jesus Christ. You were not part of this family, and then you were brought into this family by Jesus. And that means that as a child of God, you get to participate in all of the promises and all of the great things that Jesus has for his people. But at the same time, you're also held accountable. You're also to adhere to the law that God has for his people as well. And so in some ways, he's reminding them. In some ways, he's actually telling them for the first time. And so that's where we pick up in Romans 12. In chapter 12, in verse 1, Paul says this to Roman Christians. He says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Okay, and so the first thing that we see here in these two verses, which all of Paul's verses are usually packed full of stuff, what Paul is trying to get these guys to see, these ladies and these gentlemen of the Roman culture, is that he's trying presents them with a paradox. And so he says, hey, listen, I want you guys to present your bodies as living sacrifices, and then he says, this is your spiritual worship. And it's written in such a way to make you go, wait, hold on, I thought spiritual was reading the Bible and going to church, but physical was playing on a team and doing everything that comes along with not church. He says, I want you to present your bodies as living sacrifices. This is your spiritual act of worship. What he's helping us to understand is that what we do with our bodies and what we do with our spirits are inextricably linked, that they are both fully you. And so you don't just come to church to do your spiritual thing and then go to school and do your physical thing. You don't just come to church to do your spiritual thing and then go to your boyfriend or your girlfriend's house to do your physical thing. You don't just come to church to do your spiritual thing and then go to work to do your physical thing. He's saying wherever you are spirit and body. You are both. That they are bound together. And so when he says what you do with your body, it tells us what is going on in your spirit, and what is going on in your spirit manifests in what you're doing with your body. So that brings us to our first point that Paul tells us. He says, our bodies and our spirits are both students under the same teacher. Our bodies and our spirits are both students under the same teacher. Now, the other thing that he says, so body, spirits, we're the same person. We're both body and spirit. But he also says, I want you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Again, another paradox, another thing that doesn't seem to go together, right? Because sacrifices are things that are killed, things that die. You know, to sacrifice to the cause means something has to die for the cause. And Paul's not telling us that we have to be martyrs here. He's saying, listen, I want you to remain alive, but what I want you to do is with your bodies, die to your own desires. Die to your own will. Die to your own, this illusion that we have that we are autonomous and can do whatever we want, whenever we want, that we have nothing or no one to answer to. He's saying, I want you to present your bodies as living sacrifices. Now, I think it was D.L. Moody who said the problem with living sacrifices is that they keep crawling off the altar, right? So, and that's what we do a lot of times in our life, right? If we are Christians, we want to do the things that God has told us to do, and a lot of times we end up failing in some way, or we end up missing the goal that we set for ourselves. And Paul is saying, hey, listen, this is a continual thing, that you are to continue to come to the altar with yourself, with your life, and die to your will, die to your desires. It's not that the desires are necessarily bad. It's just that you have to put those at the altar and say, God, what would you have me do with these desires that I have? Okay? So, and just like in Jeremiah, I believe it's 17:9, he says that your heart is deceitful above all things. So he's saying your heart is a lot of things, and above all those things, it will lie to you. Your desires, the things that you want to do, they will say, hey, this is okay, when sometimes it's not okay. They'll say, hey, this is good, when sometimes it's not good for you. And so the whole thing is that not that you would not have any desires or that you would not even get to act on any desires. It's that you would bring those to the altar and say, Lord, I am dying to being autonomous. I'm dying to doing whatever I want, however I want, whenever I want. You tell me what is best for me. You tell me what to do with these desires, and I will submit that to you. And so we have to not only die to those desires, but we have to question those desires. We have to think through those desires, and we have to train our hearts to submit to God first. And so a couple of things that I want to talk about tonight. One is that media is the teacher of the culture. Media is the teacher of our culture. Okay, so, and I'm talking about all kinds of media. So I'm talking about movies and internet and music, all that kind of stuff. And so if anybody who knows me, and I've said it from stage here before, so you may have heard me say this before. I'm a huge Switchfoot fan. Okay, that's my favorite band. I'm older, so they're kind of older. So you guys will be like, I don't even know who that is. I love them. They're my favorite band, and they're a rock and roll band. And so, of course, they have a song about sex. And so I just wanted to read you the lyrics to this rock and roll sex song. Okay, so now this song came out in 2005. Okay, any students here born in 2005 or before? Okay, I've got one student, all right? So I knew this was going to happen. Okay, so if you're like, he's got long hair, I don't know if he's old or not. Okay, I was in college, okay, when this song came out. So if you're wondering if I'm old and if you should listen to me and how much relevance I have, probably none, but this song came out in 2005 before 99% of you guys were born. But listen to these lyrics, okay? It's not going to be up on the screen, so listen carefully. The lyrics are, sex is industry. The CEO of corporate policy, a skin-deep ministry, suburban youth, that's you guys, hail your so-called liberty. Every advertising antic, our banner waves with a neon glow. War and love become pedantic, which means irrelevant. We wage love with a mistletoe. Brilliant line here. Everyone's been scared to death of dying here alone. And then the chorus, sex is easier than love. It's easier than life. It's easier to fake and smile and bribe. It's easier to leave, it's easier to lie, but it's harder to face ourselves at night. Feeling alone, what have we done? What is the monster we've become? Where is my soul? Numb. So that's rock and roll, okay? That's maybe a different perspective from rock and roll. So the song, okay, talks about how it starts out, it starts out saying, hey, listen, sex is currency, that it sells cars, it sells magazines, it's what we barter with, it is, buy and sell, this is what we're using as a form of currency, right? Okay, and you know what currency is. If I had a dollar bill up here, the United States currency is paper money, right? It's moving to electronic numbers on an, electronic ledger, but it works the same way. It is the means by which we buy, sell, trade, right? So if I have a dollar bill and you have a good or a service, I trade you that dollar for a good or a service depending on, what we've agreed to as far as the value, right? Okay, nothing earth-shattering there. But if you've been paying attention at all to any kind of economic, talk or articles or anything like that, that's what I do for a living, by the way. I'm a nerd like that, so I like finance and economics. And so you will have heard, when the state of our economy, you will hear them talk about the rate of inflation, okay, which is 6.4%. So if you listen to anything economics or politics, sometimes dresses itself up and pretends to be economics. So you're always talking about the rate of inflation, the state of the economy. 6.4% is the rate of inflation currently. And that means that if I go and buy a hamburger for $1 today, 6.4%, that hamburger will cost me $1.06 tomorrow, okay? Which means that my dollar buys less today, or less tomorrow than it does today. That is called a devaluing of the currency, all right? It can't buy as much. It is, although it's worth the same, it just can't buy as much. Its purchasing power is not as much. And this happens. This is normal. This is a normal thing to happen to an economy, but sometimes it can get out of hand. So in the 1920s, all right, so this is after World War I, and this is before the Great Depression, which happened in 1929. You guys are studying all this stuff in your classes, okay? So in the 1920s, 1923, German inflation had gotten so bad, it's called hyperinflation. And it had gotten so bad that $1 United States dollar, $1, was the equivalent to 1 trillion German paper marks, okay? Now, we hear a trillion, that number is just it's just an idea out there, right? Apple's market cap is $1 trillion. Our national debt is trillions of dollars. It's growing every day. We just hear trillion and we go, oh, that's like billion, million, that's kind of like that. So let me give you a little bit of perspective about how big a trillion is, okay? So 1 million seconds ago, anybody have any idea how long a million seconds ago was. All right, a million seconds ago was February 18th, okay? About 11 days ago, okay? So that's a million seconds. A billion seconds is 1991, okay? That's how much bigger a billion is than a million. Now, anybody want to guess trillion? All right? 1863, okay? Anybody? Do I have 1864? Okay. 1600s, okay. All right. A trillion seconds. So we got February 18th, we've got 1991, and then we have 32,000 years ago is a trillion seconds. That's when we hear trillion, we go, oh, it's just like a trillion is a lot, okay? A trillion is not like a million. It's not like a billion. A trillion is its own thing. And so $1 to 1 trillion German paper marks. It makes the currency irrelevant, right? It doesn't matter. Like, you might as well just say a bajillion. It's the same thing, really. And so the currency had devalued so much that I could have shown up with a trillion of these things, and I could not have even bought a loaf of bread. That's how much the currency had devalued. And listen, that is exactly what is happening to us when it comes to this idea of sex. That it is being flooded in front of our faces, through our eyes, into our brains, that it is everywhere. It is no longer something that's taboo. It's no longer something that's special. It's no longer something that you can't, that gets so far out there you don't even know what it is. It is being pushed on all of us. And the means of inflation that is pushing it all on all of us is media, okay? And I'm not talking like Fox News or MSNBC. I'm not talking about a particular brand of media. I'm saying all media. So we're saying television, we're saying streaming, we're saying music, we're saying social media, print media. Remember that? Magazines and stuff? Like all of it. Everywhere you look, everywhere. And I'm not talking, it's people are dressed differently. They are suggesting different things. Our humor is highly sexualized. It is everywhere that we look. It is a devaluing of the currency. And media is the means of inflation, okay? Now, I in some way support and follow an organization called Fight the New Drug, okay? So when we're talking about media and how it pushes sex everywhere that we look, none is more prevalent and probably not more destructive than internet pornography, okay? That is the most explicit and in your face that it can get. And so this organization called Fight the New Drug, they describe themselves as a non-religious, so not associated, the organization, with any particular religion, although the people that started it are Mormons. So they're a non-religious and non-legislative, meaning they're not trying to make new laws, they're not trying to make anything illegal, they're not trying to change it through the legislative process. Non-religious, non-legislative nonprofit that exists to provide individuals, you and me, the opportunity to make an informed decision regarding pornography by raising awareness on its harmful effects using only science, facts, and personal accounts. And according to the research from the British Board of Film Classification in 2020, so not even, this came out in 2020, so not even taken into account 2020 pandemic, all of us staying at home. 85% of men, almost 60% of women have viewed pornography. So we're talking 70 to 75% of all of us, okay? Now, a few facts in case you go to trivia night at Taco Mac. Despite the fact that porn can be wildly unrealistic and often glorifies violence, sexism, and racism, one recent survey found that over half of boys, 53%, and over a third of girls, almost 40%, reported believing that pornography was a realistic depiction of sex, okay? So violent, sexist, racist people watch internet pornography and think this is what sex is like, okay? Now just put a pin in that for a second. We'll circle back around. Listen, one review of 20 studies on this topic found that teen pornography consumption This is you guys, okay? This is you guys. Negatively impacts adolescent self-esteem and mental health. Okay, so all the stress and anxiety you feel, the peer pressure that you feel, how much you love yourself, what you think of your value and worth, how you treat yourself when it comes to dating and relationships, whether you treat yourself cheaply or valuably, negatively impacted by pornography consumption. Of domestic minor trafficking victims who had been forced into pornography. Okay, so this is not me. This is not, guys in their 30s. This is students. Domestic minor trafficking victims who had been forced, trafficked, kidnapped, coerced into porn production. The average age they began filming, listen to this, 12.8 years old. Not even teenagers, being forced into filming things that they should not be filming. In 2019 alone, 1 year, the equivalent of nearly 6,650 centuries of pornography was consumed on one of the world's largest porn sites. 1 year, one porn site is equal to 6,500 centuries of people watching pornography. And last one, this is the one we're circling back around to. This is so relevant. According to a 2020 survey, approximately 45% of teens, almost half of you guys who consume porn did so in part, even though highly unrealistic, violent, sexist, racist, meaning that they treat women less than they treat men, that they treat different races less than they treat some other races, and depicts a huge amount of violence. 45% of teens who consume porn did so in part to learn about sex. Now, that is staggering to me, that this is where we would go to. For all of human history, we've figured out what sex is supposed to be, that we've figured out how to do it, and yet most of us are going online to try and figure out how to do this, and where we're going to figure out how to do this is something that treats women cheaply, forces underage, not just underage like 15, 16 years old, but 12.8 years old is the average of people kidnapped, forced, coerced into filming. And we go there to learn, how do I do this thing? What is sex like? Oh, must be violent. Oh, must be sexist. Oh, must be racist. This is where the media pushes us to go to learn about sex. And so where do we go to learn if not from the culture, if not from media? Because listen, media is consumed. This is their number one goal, with consuming you, with the buying and selling of your soul and your eyeballs for their own profit. That is their goal. They don't care about you. They don't care what this does to your sex life. When you are like my age and you are married and have children and have to wonder how this is going to affect your children, they don't care. They don't care about you. They don't care if you watch it. They don't care that it makes little inroads in your brain, that real sex actually becomes harder to accomplish because of what this does to your brain. They don't care about that. All they care is about buying and selling and trading your soul for money. When the opposite is true about the God that we talk about, that Christ on the cross was consumed by the wrath of God for you, for the purchase of your soul, so that you could come in here and laugh at me because I said the word porn. He was consumed for you, for your soul, so that you would actually be at peace. That you wouldn't look at something that was so valuable and say, oh, please treat me like crap. And so where do we go? We go to Christ, who is the all-knowing teacher. Christ is the all-knowing teacher. So a couple of you guys, y'all raised your hand saying that y'all went to high school weekend. I was there for a little bit of it. I got to hear Jeremy preach and thought it was such a great message. I got to hear Pastor David Stein preach. And one of the things that Pastor David was talking about in his sermon was he was going through the attributes of God, right? That God is all powerful, that he's immutable, he doesn't change. One of the things that God is, of just his nature, is he is omniscient. Okay, omni meaning all, scient or scient, the same word we get our word science, meaning knowledge or to know. God is all knowing. And so when we talk about anything but something as important and valuable as sex, it would behoove us to go to the person that, one, created it all and therefore knows how it works and what it's for and how it would best suit us for our greatest flourishing in using it. Let me read you a couple of verses. Matthew 7:28 and 29. If you know Jesus' first and famous Sermon on the Mount, it starts with the Beatitudes. You know, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall see God. You know, some of you may have heard these sayings. He goes through all of this. And then at the end of it, he talks about how the people that hear his words and do something with them, you know, listen to him, put them into effect. He says those are like people who built their house on a rock, that the rains came and that the wind came, but the house still stood because it was built on a firm foundation. In contrast, Jesus says that people who hear his words, hear the scripture, know what God says about anything and don't put it into practice are like people who built their house on sand, that when the rains come and the wind comes and your life starts falling apart, that your house is demolished because your foundation was so unstable. And he finishes that up, and then Matthew says this in verse 28. He says, and when Jesus finished saying these things, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. Now, why were they so astonished, and what does it mean that he was teaching as someone who had authority? Well, if you go back and read Matthew 5-7, this Sermon on the Mount, very famous. Even if you're not a Christian, you probably have heard bits and pieces from it, like the Beatitudes, the blessed are the meek, those kinds of things. What Jesus does in the middle of it, and I'm surprised they weren't more angry with him at the time, or tried to kill him then, because what he would do is he would say something like, you've heard it said, and then he would quote Old Testament law, which is, you know, God said that. So he would say, you've heard it said, something like, you shall not commit murder, and then he would say, but I say to you, that even if you hate somebody, you've already committed the same sin. You've heard it said, you shouldn't commit adultery, but I say to you that even if you look upon somebody lustfully, you've already committed the same sin. And so what he was doing is he was saying, hey, God says this, but I'm saying this. And in doing so, actually explaining what God says, and by doing that, saying what God says and what I say are of equal importance. What God says about this and what I say about this are equal. You should listen to both of us and to the same degree. Now, that's astonishing, as you can tell from the scripture, but what he was doing is he was saying, hey, listen, I have the authority to say this because I'm him. Not only do I know it all, but I created it all. This is how John begins his biography of Jesus in John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You may have heard very famous verses. You may have heard this before. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him, I love this, was not anything made that was made. All right, just all encompassing. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Some translations say the darkness has not understood it. Darkness has not grasped it. The darkness has not learned from the light. And they called Jesus, whenever they would approach Jesus, they wouldn't come and say, Savior. They would come to him and say, Teacher. That's who he was before he accomplished what he accomplished on the cross for you and me. The whole point of tonight, that brings us to our third relationship goal of this series, is that in relationships, technology and media should never teach us more than the all-knowing teacher who is Jesus. Now, just skimming the top of this stuff. Like, sometimes we get so uncomfortable that we want to kind of push it away. We want to say, I don't want to talk about that. Or maybe, what I do when I feel uncomfortable is I make jokes. I try to minimize it so I don't have to deal with real emotions. That's my own, emotional stuntedness and insecurity. That's what I do. But we all have some way to push back and say, oh, I know this is important, but I just don't want to deal with this in my own life. Don't want to deal with this in my own soul. Don't want to deal with this in my own, spirit. And so we tend to either minimize it, or some of us make it as big as possible. Maybe this is something that you know and you are engaged in. Maybe you're one of the statistics I was talking about that looks at this stuff all the time. Maybe you, even while you're doing it, going, I know this is wrong. I know this is doing something to me. I can feel something inside of me slowly changing. Maybe you feel like God is mad at you or disappointed in you, or that somehow he looks at you and goes, I can't believe that you would do that. The Lord knows I've had enough of that stuff in my own life. And so we either minimize it so we don't have to deal with it emotionally, or we make it greater because we realize the magnitude of it, and we think so little of ourselves, which is what this does to you, that we just let it crush us under the weight. And so if I had anything to say to you tonight, as someone who understands, as someone who's been there, as someone who was a student, as someone who struggles with everything, we're all in the same boat together, but Christ on the cross was consumed for you. Listen to what he says. In a few chapters later, after his Sermon on the Mount, he walks through, these different cities, and he's talking about how unrepentant they are of their sin. And he's saying, you've heard of Sodom and Gomorrah. If you know that story, the whole city was so bad that it just got swallowed up. God's like, I'm done with this. I've had it. I'm just going to let the whole earth swallow up this entire city. And it was gone in the blink of an eye. And he walks past these cities and he says, you have seen me and you have been exposed to me and you're still unrepentant. And it's going to be better for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than it will be for you. But then he starts to pray about how grateful he is that God has revealed this to his people. And he says this in Matthew 11:28, contrasting with the unrepentant cities. He says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, all who are carrying heavy weight, whatever that weight is. And I, Jesus says, will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and lowly in heart. Some translations say humble in heart. He's not arrogant. He's not angry. He's not coming after you. He's not going to rub this in your face. He says, I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. And so, whatever this topic means to you, come to Jesus. Maybe you need to be a friend to somebody struggling with this. Come to Jesus. Maybe this is you struggling with this. Come to Jesus. Maybe you're carrying the weight of your own sin. Come to Jesus. Maybe you're one of these statistics. Come to Jesus. Come to him with your questions. Come to him with your doubts. Come to him with your pushback. Come to him with your failure. Come to Jesus. Just come and sit at the feet of the teacher. Learn from him. Find rest in him. Because his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Let me pray for you.